But I'm Captain Will, and today we'll be going over non-towered airfield ops. I know it's kind of like a more basic private pilot conversation to have because most of us don't go to non-towered airfields. But about almost 20 years ago, I was at Indiana State University basically learning to fly instruments, and got about 800 hours there at a little airport called Sky King. If you ever get to look it up, it's at Terre Haute, Indiana. And basically, this is all we ever did, was non-towered, uncontrolled. So anytime we had to get IFR clearances, it was all like non-standard compared to what we do today, contacting tower or clearance delivery and getting our clearance. So like I said, about 800 hours later, went to the airlines and experienced a whole different side of the world on basically controlled ops versus uncontrolled. And where you take it, uncontrolled, I think sometimes is more controlled than what we have at tower airports, just because everyone's SA for a small airport like that and over 40 planes flying at once. It kind of brings you back to like T6 days with your towers you had that control the pattern. And that's kind of where the Sky King was, as we'd fly there, almost 20 and 30 planes in the air at a time, and your SA is so heightened, you know where everybody is in the pattern. And feel free, if you got any questions, write it down. Yeah, especially the FAPEs. You guys have any stories to tell with your experience going to off stations that were non-towered as well, let me know. See if I can get this to work. So basically what we'll be going over today, like I said, quick and sweet. This is actually a brief that comes from the AOPA safety, flight safety magazine. So I just kind of imported a lot of stuff. Like I said, it's going to bring us back to kind of olden days, basic pilot instruction, but go through it. So non-towered field, their definition is those not served by an operating ATC tower. I didn't know the numbers were this high for just US alone, but 20,000 airports are non-towered. So only gives us about 500 that are. And then I just put it up there for the definition where it comes from for the FAA. We have it in our 11217 and 202 of all three states out the basic right-of-way rules, which we'll get into in a little bit. So basic, like I said, going back to basic flying, this is one of the topics they wanted to discuss is your ideal traffic pattern. Because a lot of us are not used to it. We request close, we pull downwind, they record us on base and we're cleared for our touch and go landing, especially at Travis. So the right-of-way rules are there to basically prevent collisions on the air and the ground. And your standard traffic pattern is consisted of 6 legs, which you can see in the diagram below. Like I said, this comes out of AOPA, and what you can see is like the little icons, the A, B, C, D, and E. Those are all basically position reports that you are expected to give. Again, it's not regulatory, but the FAA recommends that you do make these position reports. So you can see crosswind, downwind, base, final, and then your upwind leg, which a lot of us speak to the upwind leg as like soon as you depart. That's actually your departure leg. Your upwind leg would be the parallel that goes along with the runway. Some things to remember for this is your pattern altitude. So C5, any other heavy traffic is going to be at your 1,500 feet, where your regular, is going to be at 1,000 feet, where your regular traffic is only going to be at 500 feet. I said that right in the first time, sorry. 1,000 feet for your regular traffic and 1,500 feet, which is us. So we're flying, 1,600 at Travis. So it can be a factor for us. People are going to see us like crazy because we're C5, large in the sky. It's easy to point out a C5. Where we're going to have the problems is where we're going in these non-towered airfields is identifying other traffic in the field. and kind of like those procedures of when they're making the radio calls, when we should be making radio calls for our positions. It's kind of like the thing of if you have more calls or more radio reports, that's going to help everybody in the pattern basically build their SA to identify you. One thing I didn't know is like when you make the radio calls, which you get into the next slide, is like at the point in time when you should be making the calls. Just because like most of us will get on downwind, we'll report, or we'll get on base, and you're actually supposed to probably do it prior to corners, which is, like I said, and we'll see in a little bit, is where you're identified the best in the sky. Basically, pilots should consult the AFD, which we do. You know, it's on our regular mission planning. We'll consult that. We'll look at AOPA's, airport directory, or sectional charts to identify all these non-towered airfields. But when do you think we should, anybody can spout an answer, but like when should we expect to go to a non-towered field in the C5? Not all at once.
I feel like as Heather, I mean, I've never done it, but either on like an OST where you're practicing something that we don't usually do, or if you're going in somewhere after the tower's closed.
Yeah, exactly. So my experience, LTM, wasn't expecting. I haven't done it, like I said, in so many years. And I think it was LTM 1 for me. We were flying to a towered airfield, delayed just by like 1 or 2 hours. And by the time we get there, the tower's closed. So then it's like, man, you have to basically jog your memory, like all the calls you need to make, position report. Can I shoot an instrument approach with ATC facility? And like, what are the other steps I'm going to take? So that's what happened to me. I don't know, does anybody else have any other stories of C5, one non-towered airfields?
Yeah, this is Hafker here. I've done it twice. Both times going into the field, the tower was open and the upload took longer than the tower was staying open for. So we ended up departing. One was Lawton Fort Sill in somewhere in the Midwest, Kansas, Oklahoma, something like that. The other one was guard base outside Baltimore. I can't remember the name right now, but both of them, we were able to get our clearance and everything on the ground from control, or like local control, or like ATC in the air, and just did all the calls and stuff. But yeah, both of them were kind of unplanned, non-towered ops.
Okay. Yeah, that makes it easy when you know ahead of time that it's going to be non-towered compared to like showing up last minute and, hey, tower closed early. Now you just got to figure it out on your own. So it's always good to mission plan prior if you're going to have it that way. But yeah, anyways, we'll press on unless there's any other stories. So standard per FAA, like I said, turns are going to be made to the left. And this goes back to private pilot lessons too. You can look at that sectional chart. If it's not going to be to the left, it's either going to be in that AFD or it's actually going to be on the sectional chart listed with an RP. So you'll know right pattern. Now there can be like single runway ops, kind of like this picture shows, and say the city is to the west. And so you're going to do like one direction pattern ops are going to be to the left, and then the other direction they're going to be to the right. But it should, like I said, be listed somewhere either in our Aero app if we have information gyro report on it, or AFD sectional chart. Looks like Lighter, you did west. Is that Westover? I think I just saw your message.
Nah, it's Wendover on the border of Utah and Nevada.
Okay. Awesome. And you said in C5?
Yep. Picked up a bunch of Army dudes there out in the middle of the desert.
Awesome. All right. So we'll get into the next slide here. So communication, again, this is one that we're not frequent with. So if you just remember the sir sandwich, yes, or sir, yes, sir. If you think of that making a radio call, you should be fine every time. So I just use one that was local here. It's the nut tree. was it just over in Vacaville? So Nut Tree traffic, Fred 5-2 turning base runway 2-3, and then Nut Tree. So if you just start with the field and end with the field every time you read a call, you should be fine. And then there's all the places you should be making your calls. So anytime taxiing, movement on the ground. Again, for Fred, it's going to be SA builder for everybody, just so they know where this big heavy aircraft is going. Your departure, if you're staying in the pattern, crosswind, downwind, base and final, and then your arrival as well, where you're coming from. So staying in the pattern is kind of where we tend not to do if we are departing this non-tower airfield. We're usually departing and pressing on with the mission. So like you said, Heather, if we are getting into maybe a local scenario or OST, I recommend like maybe we should try doing this more, getting into these fields that are non-towered so we can practice the radio calls, building that SA, and then just getting in the area with general aviation traffic would help too, just because we're so used to being controlled and vectored in. So we need to be able to, I guess, increase our experience on like judgment of, can we fit in behind this aircraft, or do we need to slow down? Do we need to configure early? There's a lot of practices that we don't get into often. So here's what I was talking about earlier is announcements made just prior to turning the corners, because it puts that silhouette in the sky a lot easier to spot for other aircraft, especially large aircraft like us. We're going to be easy to pick out, but those small little Cessnas and tail draggers are going to be tough to see. And then just note that even though people are in the pattern, you still can have a lot of, I guess, non-radio equipped aircraft. So you just need to know, like, make sure if they're flying that left-hand traffic pattern that you're scanning, because even though they could be there, they might not be making the radio calls. We should, as good practice, always monitor CTAP frequencies when we're going into a place. Even if we're going nearby, like you could have jump monitoring, like if it's close, like even Vacaville doing pattern ops, you could have jump monitoring Nut Tree, just so you build your SA on how many people are in the aircraft in the pattern over there. So even though like tower gives us all our clearance, just remember, like when you're in an uncontrolled and non-towered airfield, that it's basically the crew's ability of sequencing and avoidance for all other traffic. It's not on it. Like CTAF can give you advisories all the time, like how many people are in traffic, what runway they're using. Just know that it's still on the air crew. And any questions on communication procedures at all? Like I said, it's just kind of basic overview of what we've already learned before at pilot training. All right, next we'll get into collision avoidance. So most mid-air collisions are the primary hazard associated with flying in non-towered airports. And it normally happens, you would think like an IFR day where you can't see, or something, like hazy, cloudy day, but it's more often it's when it's clearing a million out and like 5-10 statute miles. And this is due to like the amount of traffic there's going to be at these uncontrolled fields. So on a beautiful day, calm winds especially, you're going to see all these general aviation planes out. So again, if you are going to one of these places that's non-towered, make sure you do that study. And this was from the AOPA, like the be prepared, familiarity breeds comfort and confidence. So chair fly prior to becoming airborne. And that's crucial in the C5 anyways, especially when we're on taxiing in different places. Like airfield study and route study is so important, but it's just one other factor to throw in if you're going to an uncontrolled field. They listed some safety tips as well for the collision avoidance, and it's kind of stuff that we already have in our guidance, in our checklist. So like the landing lights within 10 nautical miles, we already have that below 10. Their sterile cockpit was within 10 nautical miles, so I was kind of threw in what we should probably use. We got the flight level 180 that we always brief, but then what if there's a distance? Like what if you're staying below flight level 180? So I just doubled it. 20 nautical miles is probably the best for the C5. get all the checklists done, and then have everybody out scanning. Where I think we should benefit more of is the direction most attention outside the aircraft. And that's just basically because I feel like a lot of people in C5 just like sitting in the jump seat. People are looking down the box, looking in at their screen, flying off their instruments. And we never are constantly outside besides like the jump seat or scanning for traffic. So just, I don't know, keep that in your cross check, like outside, always looking outside, especially when you're doing uncontrolled and non-towered airfields. Big thing with Sky King was, like I said, with 40 different planes, 30 different planes in the sky at all time, was that listening up. So it brings you back to the T6 days where you have to be listening to every radio call. And again, just with us, we're so used to being vectored and directed, so you might kind of disregard a lot of the calls, but just remember that you got to keep that up on SA on all the traffic reports. And then SA as far as where you are in the whole pattern compared to everybody else. So if you give your position report that you're 40 miles out, 30 miles out, you'll be entering the left downwind, it should start from that point in time of when I'm going to be picking up traffic. Are they staying in the pattern? What number am I going to be? I'm definitely going to be faster than most of your general aviation aircraft. Maybe not a T6, but you know. But mostly everybody else. So what can you do to either slow down or get ahead of that traffic? So say they're departing and they're staying in the pattern. You're probably not going to get there in time. They can do another pattern and you can slow down and get configured and get in behind them. And the other aspect of it is I'm going to be a lot wider than that general aviation traffic just because of our speed. All right, so the FAA goes over one of their FARs is the direction terms, which we talked about. It's going to be standard left unless it's displayed or they're actually doing visual light signals or visual markings on the ground. Like if you've been to Oshkosh before, which I know Colonel Trumbull has. I don't know if you guys had it go in VFR. Hopefully not. I assume IFR. But I had the experience of flying a Seneca, Piper Seneca, all the way to Oshkosh, and we canceled IFR, went down VFR, and you fly basically visual markings all the way to a VFR pattern to the field. So if you ever get a chance to do that in your career, that's a pretty good experience. And then so were you able to get that, Colonel Trumbull?
Hey, bud. Sorry. Yeah, I was having some connectivity issues there. We were IFR, right? Yeah, and Heather just texted, and I was trying to figure out how to shoot a chat real quick. I got it up now, but yeah, essentially we did a visual in there, and I can share a picture of our TCAS. It was like a fish finder over like a bass. It was nuts. But essentially, it was also the first time I had an RA override another RA. It was a bit hair raising, but also a good opportunity to kind of like also highlight what you're talking through right now. But definitely, you know, I wish we could have brushed up a little bit on non-towered ops before we went in there. Not so much for us, but just to build that SA you're talking about while folks are calling, you know, left base to the pink dot, right base to the blue dot, you know, with call sign, etc. And aircraft type, just to help build our picture. But yeah, it was interesting, to say the least.
Yep, I agree. All right, let me try to get the screen back real quick. There we go. Yeah, so a lot of different procedures going into Oshkosh. It's almost where you want to turn the fish finder off because it's just mind blowing of how many planes are there. AOPA also identified these two entry methods into the pattern as like basically one of the high causes of collisions if executed poorly. And that's basically because you're coming over midfield. And then, like I said, with us, we're going to be at that 1,500 feet pattern altitude. And then if you have someone on downwind, they're going to be at the 1,000 feet. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Heather, is like could we match the 1,000 feet? Yeah, you perfectly can. Like, you can go down to the 1,000 feet. It just, you gotta make sure that you're trained and know that your references are gonna be different. And now we're gonna be feel a little bit lower than normal. We might want to fly closer to the field because of being lower. So just like I said, it goes all back to the pilot training. But I would recommend the one on the left, just from my prior experience, always coming over, just because now you're not trying to slow down and time another aircraft that's on downwind. I would rather come over them, and then if you had to descend down to that that pattern altitude, either to match or stay at the 1,500 feet. All right. So VFR and IFR ops, this is probably where our money makers are, because like we were talking about before, we're always going to be IFR. So and it's kind of confusing to the VFR pilots that are listening to us flying into a non-towered airfield that is IFR capable. As far as VFR, basically, if you go to somewhere and you don't know what to do because there's no CFTAP or CTAP, no one's on it, no one's listening, there's no traffic in the area, you don't have anybody on your fish finder, it's like, how do I know what's the suitable field? So hopefully we can still get our weather information through the box, and they can send us back, but that is a TAF, right, that we request from the FMS. Unless you're in the pattern and you want to send an en route forecast and get the current METAR, you can do that as well. But let's just say like you have no ATIS or anything, no weather information. So recommended ops is fly over the field 500 feet above your pattern altitude. You're going to be doing the visual. And then old days, looking at the wind socks, wind T direction, and then the tetrahedron. And that's just going to basically tell you which is going to be the suitable runway that you can use. And then make sure you state your intentions again. Like, hey, I'm flying over the field for a weather check, and now I'm going to be entering this downwind for this runway. Fred ops, we're primarily going to do the straight in approach. So with that, 11217, I think, talks about doing the 3-mile call and a 1-mile call. Just stating your intentions as well. But again, if you don't know what that weather is, I recommend flying over the field. I believe it talks in 11-2C503 about practice approaches. I don't know if anybody in here like IPs. Have you guys ever gone to field VFR and shot practice approaches while under VFR? I believe most of us would get an IFR clearance.
So in KC-135s, I know it's not exactly the same, but they actually do that all the time. That's their CFIC relies on that.
Gotcha.
So yeah, we've done it. It's a non-towered field naturally. It's very challenging. You have to do a lot of coordination if anyone is there. But if you're the only one doing them, it's exactly like flying at a towered field, except you just don't have anyone to talk to.
I see. So it wasn't too much like traffic or confusion. It was pretty easy to handle.
It's a little artificial because it is always in use for that particular use. Like it's just what they do there. So everyone who's flying there kind of expects it already. But yeah, they basically developed a guide for us that just had like all the callouts that you need to make, when you need to make them, where you need to be looking, and it's just like the brief you've given so far, in that you're calling out all your points, checking for other traffic, and flying as normally as you can.
Yep. Cool. So there's a option if anybody wants to take that in C5 and start flying. Maybe we can get a hold of that KC-135 in-flight guide page that you're talking about. Let's just throw it in ours, or we can make one of our own. But yeah, I think it'd be a good thing to have, just because it's a refresher. And then if you go into a field like this that's non-towered, you could easily reference it. Like I said, IFR is what we're going to be doing most. So the reason that's going to be confusing to the pilots is because not only are we talking to an ATC controller for like getting the vectors into the approach, now we have to be on the CTAF frequency 2 and basically stating our position locations as well. So the reason that's confusing to them is some people might be on their private pilot cross country and not understand what this waypoint is or this fix, like Kinnics inbound, like, or procedure turn inbound, they're not going to have a clue at all because they're still working on the private or even the sport pilot. And it, like I said, it's worse during the VFR day only, or even VMC with that broken overcast layer, because now you're going to be shooting approach above them and then coming below the clouds, and there could be traffic right in front of you. So again, just I know it's like use common sense and state out. Copy. Thanks for 3-minute warning. And state out where you're at, what your intentions are, even if you have to give them a VFR reference when you're flying IFR. So we talk about terminating service. Let's see if I got any people in here. How about Kelsey? What do you think terminating service is, and what does that mean for us?
Terminating service essentially means that they're stopping looking at you. They're stopping monitoring you on their screens. If you get flight following, they can continue to half monitor you, but essentially it just means that they're no longer really responsible for you and your clearances.
Copy. Cool. So yeah, terminating our IFR. There is different procedures within ICAO, which I was not familiar with. So if we ever cancel VFR or cancel IFR in ICAO, you have to use the exact verbiage that they state in the Doc 444, which is like request IFR cancel. And then they should come back IFR clearance, flight clearance canceled at this time. Another thing to get into is the IFR release. So I think Hafter was talking about it. Basically, we kind of see it a lot of times when we're IFR flying out of Germany and we do like slot time. Think of that as kind of like your IFR release. But like back in the day on Sky King, we used to call up and the radio on inside would call ATC, get our release time. And it's basically like an expected airborne time, wheels up time. That if we didn't get off the ground by that time, they're basically, our slot's going to stop again. We have to recall and get that release time again. So Sky King, we would take off in a little Cessna, 500-foot overcast, and as soon as you get in the air, we'd be contacting ATC to pick up that IFR clearance. On the way inbound, if you are IFR coming all the way down to the ground and you weren't able to cancel your IFR on the air, you can still call on the ground. Either the FSS, the military base, you can use that base ops or the originating base ops. So we could call back to say to Travis if that was our originating, or then last, as you can actually get the number for the ATC or clearance delivery and call them up and cancel the flight plan. Any questions, or I think I'm out of time, but we'll scroll through these real quick. Non-standard ops. So yeah, if you're going anywhere that's uncontrolled, more than likely they're going to have gliders, balloons, some kind of parachuters. It's identified on your charts as well. And then the biggest thing for us is just ask ATC prior to canceling, prior to going VFR into an area, if there's any active jumpers or balloon parachuting. Like, it should be notamed as well going into that field. This is just the AOPA's common courtesies. So we are very experienced pilots. We're professional pilots, so be a professional. You can sit there and lecture someone all day long about, non-towered airfields, or someone that screws up your pattern. Just make sure that everybody's a different level of experience, and just be courtesy and show respect. You can always talk about stuff later on the ground, but like over the CTAF frequency isn't the place to be calling someone out. And then lastly, tips for some IPs out there that are listening. So yeah, definitely quiz your students. Don't have much time to do that, I know, in this environment, but more than anything, it's going to be that review in base ops before you're going somewhere. Is discuss the traffic pattern legs, pattern entry, departure procedures, phraseology, and then those collision points that we talked about earlier. And then, yeah, some other common problem areas. Any questions at all? I know people are probably cutting out to go to this OG ceremony.
Oh, hey, Tyler, thanks for this quick review. I know there was a good bit of work, and you had a lot, especially in this just for your previous life, and some just good stories and tidbits to share with us. Just to verify, we're saving this right underneath all the OPDs and CTs for YouTube under the double deuce. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I believe Jeff has been saving everything. So I'll post this on, I'll make a few edits and then post it on the Slack, and then you can copy it over.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely a worthwhile, PowerPoint to pull up if folks find themselves at a local and we go somewhere, we're going to do some non-towered ops. Just a quick review, right? So that way you're not, like you said, thinking of the Sir Sandwich as you're heading in there, just those tidbits to remind yourself when you're calling, entering the pattern or moving throughout the pattern, right? To build your essay and also keep folks safe around us. But yeah, hats off, man. Thanks for keeping training at the forefront here during this COVID, and looking forward to the next one on Friday.
No problem, sir. And I appreciate it. Volunteers for next week, guys. Still, I got Leighton teaching Fridays and do, I think, FMS failures and 4 flight, and then we need people for next week. So send me a message, please.